Hey everybody, my name's Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get into it, I just want to do the normal opening stuff, meaning if you really like this show, be sure to subscribe to it wherever you get it, whether that be here on YouTube. You can go down to the box with the words and hit the subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so when new episodes drop, which, if you're just curious, are about every Thursday around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But if you absolutely love the podcast and can't get enough of it, be sure to check out the podcast website for a couple reasons. But the main reason is there are posts of many of the episodes. I know I'm hideously behind on posting for the more recent ones, but I'm only one man, so I'm doing what I can. But if you are interested in something that I'm making for the culture, then you can go over there. That website, by the way, is bento-box.ghost.io. That link is anywhere you can find this podcast. That link kind of is. So it's in the description of the podcast if you're listening to it. It's in the description of the podcast on the YouTube page. It's in the description of this video. So you can find it anywhere. You can get to it very easily. But the reason why you might want to do that is because I've been making something that I think of as for the culture of anime fans, and that is my take on a anime watch list app. And what makes it different is, unlike many watch list apps, which are, for better and worse, a checklist, I figured that that's handled. People have that handled. So what I've built is a version of an anime watch list app that lets you take notes on every single episode you're watching. I used it for the previous season, the winter 2026 season, but I'm also using it for the spring 2026 season. It helped me organize my thoughts. It helped me make these episodes every week. So definitely go check that out if that is at all interesting to you. Now let's jump into the thing we're talking about today. I think this movie came out in 2021, but I just love this movie. And that movie is Saratobi Miss Hokusai. So, without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to I to give us a plot summary. Take it away, I.
Miss Hokusai is a quiet, episodic film set in Edo period Japan, centered on O-A, the daughter of the legendary artist Katsushika Hokusai. Rather than telling one continuous story, the film unfolds through a series of moments from her life as a painter. O-A is talented, independent, and often contributes to her father's work, yet remains unrecognized in his shadow. As the story moves forward, we see the rhythms of daily life in Edo, the struggles of being an artist, and the blurred line between imagination and reality. At times, paintings feel alive, and the act of creating art takes on an almost supernatural quality. At its emotional core is O-A's relationship with her younger sister, O-Now, who is blind and frail. Through her, we see a softer, more vulnerable side of O-A. The film explores themes of artistic identity, family, and the quiet weight of living alongside greatness. It doesn't build to a dramatic climax. Instead, it drifts forward like life itself, focusing on feeling rather than plot.
So, now with the plot summary out of the way, I first want to make a little correction. This movie actually came out in 2015. I was off by 6 years. That doesn't happen to me very often, but there you go. But before we talk about my thoughts on the film, I want to talk about the environment this film was released into, because I think it's important in terms of what the film's talking about and the way the film treats not just Hokusai, but all of the artist characters, and even all the characters in general. But when this movie was released, Hayao Miyazaki was doing the thing that he does very often. He was saying he was going to retire. If you don't know anything about Hayao Miyazaki in that pattern, he's going to retire every couple years at this point, and then promptly doesn't. And the hilarious joke is that he can't let anybody else make a better anime film than he did. So he comes back to show the kids how it's done. But whenever he starts making noises about retiring, this search happens, and everybody's looking for the next Hayao Miyazaki. Everybody's looking for who would take his place. To give you an idea of who people were considering at the time, you have Makoto Shinkai, which I always remember Makoto Shinkai's name by thinking that Shinkai is the sound that's made when someone reaches into your chest and pulls your heart out and crushes it. Shinkai because that's how it feels to watch basically all of his movies before Your Name. Is this deeply emotionally manipulative movies that end in sadness is a thing that he made for many years. But so that was him. And then there was Mamoru Hosoda, who is well known for Wolf Children, Summer Wars, Belle. I think his most recent movie, Scarlet, was not very well received. But somebody who was, I want to get his name right, so I'm going to pull my phone back up here. But someone who was whispered about in that same vein for a brief moment because of this film was the director of this film, Keiichi Hara. And I think that this film that earned him that kind of attention because it's an interesting film about art and the creative process and what it is to live as a creative and to actually do the craft of making things in a really serious and contemplative and dedicated way. Even if you don't necessarily have as much love for it as other people do. And this film does a great job, and we'll get to them in a second, but it does a great job of showing different levels of artists and different personalities, the way they clash, the way they gel together. This film proposed a relationship with art that was very true for the time period, but the way the film does it, it was a constant magical realism that is unlike anything I've seen in most other anime or anime films, for that matter. But the title of the film is intriguing enough. It follows Miss Hokusai, not Hokusai, not his wife. His wife is in this film, but it follows his daughter, Oe. And Oe is known for being a quite incredibly white and quite talented ukiyo-e artist in her own right. And in her own time, too. And I believe she did actually study under her father. But this film also takes a couple liberties to have conversations about specifically Hokusai, I believe is Tenzo Hokusai. And it portrays Oe as a woman who, at the time you're encountering her, I don't remember her age in the film, but she has devoted herself to the craft of ukiyo-e painting alongside her father. And they open up with this great scene of Oe explaining how her and her father live. And it's notable that her and her father do not live with her mother and Hokusai's wife. You're like, and Hokusai's wife, or Hokusai's ex-wife? Probably Hokusai's wife. I don't think they ever divorced. But the way she puts it is basically, whenever it gets, the most amazing thing she says in that whole thing is, whenever it gets too messy, we just move. And just the entire movie takes place in Edo-era Japan and in Edo itself. So at one point, Oe goes to Sensoji Temple. And having now been there, I have this moment when I saw that scene. That lantern's a little high. You can touch that. A lot of people can touch that lantern. I have touched that lantern. It's a thing you do. When you go into the big lantern, it's Sensoji, the gold leaf is worn off on the dragon carving on the bottom from so many fingers just fucking scraping it. But the portrayal of Hokusai in this movie is not generous. It's barely even kind. But it feels honest. And a thing I like about artist biopic movies, of which there are a couple. There's this one, arguably, although this is a little bit different. There's Pollock, which is about Jackson Pollock. There's the one about, I've seen a lot of them. There's the one about Vincent van Gogh, which is supposed to be devastating. I don't think I've seen that. Keiichi, I think has seen that, and she's like, it's devastating. Maybe don't. There's the one about, what's his face? Basquiat, I think called Basquiat. Is that in order for them to be any good, they have to remind you that the artist is a person. And I think what this film does so effectively, it takes primarily two figures, Hokusai himself and his daughter Oe, although there's a second daughter in the film, Nanao, although he had 5 children. Nanao is a combination of rumors and pure fiction. But we'll get to her in a second, because she is important to the plot of the thing. It depicts them all as real, unbalanced, true-to-life humans in ways that you don't get when you learn about Hokusai in an art history textbook. You learn about this man who created 12 views of Mount Fuji, who created the Great Wave off of Gawa. I have a Hokusai art print book somewhere around here, like a giant square coffee table book that I've had for a long time. It's falling apart. I keep meaning to take the prints out of it and get them framed, but I don't. And in every single good artist biopic, they managed to get at the humanity of the creative person in question, no matter how famous. The Pollock biopic is devastating because he's a drunk. And he's fully a drunk in that film. I have an incredible core memory of movies, of watching the actor who plays Jackson Pollock ride a bicycle back to his house drunk. And it's devastating to watch. Because it's just like, you're watching someone who's painting the Revere, they're in museums all over the world, but like, look at this person and he's a miserable drunk who's good for nothing. And if I had to say that was the way they treated Hokusai, the actual painter Hokusai in this film, they do it kind of that way. Like, Hokusai is a little pathetic. Because the only thing that he seems to be good at or interested in is ukiyo-e painting. And another thing that the film opens up with is Oe saying, there once was a crazy old man who created a giant dharma on a city block-sized piece of paper. And then the next day, painted 2 sparrows on a grain of rice. She sets up, and the movie sets up, through her narrating in the beginning, the myth of Hokusai. The great man you're expecting because of his paintings and his notoriety and all that stuff. And then the man you're greeted with, just a miserable sack who, yes, does incredible work, but at the cost of almost everything else. But the other thing that this movie does through its magical realism thing is it gives throughout the movie has a mystery of the moment quality to it, in that every so often in the movie you'll encounter painting or a problem that can be solved by painting somehow. And all the patrons in the movie who come to Hokusai and Oe about commissioning works, everything from religious paintings to erotica, both of which become plot points in the movie, eventually. But we have this belief in spirituality embodied and inherited in these paintings. And that's rooted in Zen, Buddhism, and Shintoism's attitudes towards art as a meditative practice. And as somebody who draws almost obsessively very often, I can speak to this. The act of making art for artists and creatives is more important than the final product. The final product is something that somebody who doesn't have that thing in them can take away and can appreciate. But the product for us is the ritual of getting it out, the ritual of putting it on paper, the ritual of moving it through us and through the medium that we're using onto the page, so to speak. And that page is metaphorical. It could be a piece of paper, it could be a Photoshop or Illustrator or Procreate document. It could be a keyboard. It could be a guitar. I'm talking like art as artists and art as like craft as an overall thing, not as just like drawing on paper in the case of that. But the thing that this movie does is it uses that framing and it makes it real. So one of the first things that you see in the movie is this painting of a dragon that Hokusai has been working on for, you find out pretty quickly thereafter, about a month. And Oe is crouched over him with her pipe, and a bug flies in front of her, and it's a great little animated flourish of she tries to kill the bug, and the pipe lets the ember go onto the page, and Hokusai freaks out and just slices across the page. Just like his brush was signing his name, and then it slices all the way up into the right. And he's just like, it's ruined. Because it was about to set itself on fire. And the movie shows consequences of fire throughout the film. First with that little ember that Oe mistakenly flicked onto Hokusai's dragon. And then with a giant raging fire in the middle of Edo, somewhere in the middle of the movie. And then towards the end, there's a woman who is so afraid of a painting that's supposed to be a depiction of hell that she goes slowly insane because she thinks that the painting is causing hell come to get her. And she hallucinates a demon coming out of a paper lantern, knocks it over, and it sets itself on fire as she cowers in the corner. People find the fire, they put it out, it's extinguished, it's fine. And that painting is fixed, so it's more balanced. But there's a continuing motif of fire there throughout the film, because that was a pretty practical and deep worry in that period of time in Japan. Famously, the firefighters in Japan were both good Samaritans and absolute lunatics, and a lot of the Yakuza tattoos, Japanese-style tattoos that you see on Yakuza, are not just descended from criminals, but descended from firefighters who would get these elaborate odes to the ocean in tattoo form on them. But, so that's where the movie starts. It starts, and it maintains this eye towards creative living and what it really means to live as a creative person and to live as somebody who's actively creating, and not just like, there's no artist cosplay happening here. All the people you meet, even the most buttoned-up ukiyo-e illustrated artists, are real working artists. Some may be more successful than others. Denjiro, the kind of punching bag of the movie, is even he is a really successful artist in terms of erotica because he indulges in it a lot. But B has this sense of sensuality in his painting, in his work, that pisses OA off because she can't get that. Because a thing you learn about OA is that she's a virgin. She has no experience with men. And the movie highlights that and shows her try to force her way through that and it not go very well. It just be more awkward than she thought it would ever be and not come to fruition, pardon the pun. But the movie is very much about her coming up as an artist in the shadow of somebody who is already in his time a great artist. And her learning, and it's also about her learning from her father, who really the only thing he can offer her is how to be a great artist. And he has this, and there is this religious thing to him in the way he talks about creating art, in the way he talks about demons and curses and things like that, and he uses those but he only uses those stories as ways to connect with people so they can see things like the geisha whose head floats around inside of her bed net at night. But the thing about this movie, and the reason why I started with that little thing of when this movie came out and when Hayao Miyazaki goes and says he's going to retire, there's this frantic search for who the next person is. That's not coming from a place of artist, that's coming from a place of commerce. I know that sounds odd, but the people who want there to be Miyazaki want there to be a kind of purchasing swap-in for the Studio Ghibli Hayao Miyazaki empire. And Mr. Hayao, anime was a mistake, Miyazaki, the grumpy man that he is, has said, when I quit, Studio Ghibli will probably just fall apart. Isao Takahata took I think the better part of a decade to make Princess Kaguya, and then died shortly after it was released. And the thing I like about the insane footage that you always see of Miyazaki saying the darkest thing you've ever heard is it feels in a way like what this movie is doing with Hokusai. And what I mean there is Miyazaki is not, there's no performance there. Because we all see and engage with art in the form of entertainment and music, and any form of entertainment or music is a form of art that is being put through the lens of capitalism and given to you for a price. That's just the way it is. If you like anime, you love anime, you love art. If you love movies, you love art. This shouldn't be an insane thing to say, but so much of that lens is now pointed at people who have media training or value media training or want to say, or there is value in John Hamm going out and doing the press junkets for Your Friends and Neighbors, the Apple TV Plus show with John Hamm in it right now. And that's tons of fun to see. But it's put on. Like, yes, everybody's having fun. No, I'm not saying that John Hamm is being implicitly fake. But it's kind of a put on. It's like a dog and pony show for the benefit of publicity to get you to go watch the second season of actually what I think is a very good show. But when you see footage of Miyazaki, he's not doing that. He had no interest in that. He is famous, and I'm sure has benefited from fame, but he is famous because of the work he's done. There's a lot of people who are famous because they're famous now, like Kim Kardashian, for example. She's famous for a sex tape, but essentially that it moved past that, and she's famous because her fame generates more fame. And you look at some of the biggest musicians, and that's also true. I saw a long time ago, I decided that I didn't love my Instagram feed, and so what I decided to do was I decided to consciously curve it towards animation, art, illustration, photography, all the creative things that I really love. So if I wasn't going to see my friends' posts, which I still do see occasionally, I would open it up and I wouldn't see quite as much just nonsense. I would see a ton of art and creativity and photography and all of that other stuff. And that's been really successful. But that incentive structure has created a kind of creative force it's about the end product. It's not always, even if there's process there, which there certainly is. It's about the end product being served to the viewer. Not necessarily about the process of making it. Yes, I'm sure it starts there, especially for a lot of YouTubers, but it doesn't end there. And the thing about artists like Hayao Miyazaki, or in this film, an artist like Hokusai, is they're both functioning in that system, but just barely. This entire movie is essentially you're watching artists live their lives, take commissions, and make a living. It's really what you're watching. OA constantly takes commissions for everything from... She's the one who repaints the dragon. She takes commissions for erotica all the time, although she gets notes on her erotic work because, once again, she doesn't have the life experience to feed into the work. All the people who she works with, in that sense, say, like, oh, your stuff is beautiful, but it's a little soulless. Denjiro might suck. He might not be great at drawing people, but the feeling you get from his work is so much more sensual and aware of what's happening there than your incredible study of, oh, this is what this would actually look like. And they show in this film, and I think it's really incredible, not just OA, but Hokusai and Denjiro and all the artist characters, constantly going out and going to different places with essentially a sketch pad and sketching and observing and watching the world in the way that artists do for reference and inspiration and nothingness creative thought. And it's really, if you like artist biopics, like the ones I mentioned, Basquiat, Pollock, I forget the Van Gogh one. The Van Gogh one came out pretty recently too. If you like artist biopics, you'll probably love this film. And I think it's available, I know you can get it on iTunes or Apple TV, whatever they're calling it now, but I think it's also available on Netflix, last I checked. So you can definitely go check it out there. But it's just a fun time. And so here's what I want to talk about. The only point of real non-mumblecore-esque tension in the movie, and that is the second daughter, Hokusai's second daughter, a much younger woman named... And Onao's deal is that she was born blind. And she lived with a monk, and she's learning to play the lute, aka she's learning to be a biwa player, which is a common thing that monks did in the time period, and that blind people did in the time period. They would go live with monks and learn to do some sort of biwa playing thing and travel over the country and play the biwa for money, food, shelter, all that stuff. I talked about this a bunch in the episode about Inuo, which features that prominently, and that's a huge touch point for that film, is the network of blind biwa players who used to go around and sing the stories of the Hike. But as the movie progresses, you see that OA always goes to visit Onao and with her. It makes a point of spending tons of time with her. They spend time particularly on the bridge because Onao can stand on the bridge and she can feel the vibrations of people moving across the bridge. She can hear people moving across the bridge. She can hear things above and below the bridge. And then they have a boat ride sequence that they work into the only freeze frame thing in the film, which is a great thing, and they freeze frame it into a really touching version of the Great Wave painting with Oe and Onao in a boat going up the wave. It's a really great sequence, actually. But as the movie progresses, and just like the very first scene that you see Onao in, they give you a really big hint because they show her in front of spider lilies, and in front of red spider lilies. If you know anything about that flower, you know that that's foreshadowing. What ends up being a primary schism between, or a conflict in the film, is the fact that Hokusai seems afraid of Onao. He seems genuinely afraid of her. And he seems scared, and everyone says to him, and actually not everyone, but Oe says, "Are you afraid of getting sick? You should just go see your daughter, it would make her so happy." And eventually he does. And you see this entire movie, you're seeing the very active imaginations of great artists. When Oe is trying to redraw the dragon that she messed up, inside of a day, inside of a single night, a side character who becomes tries to show romantic interest pretty unsuccessfully in Oe. He's a bumbling goober, but he's doing his best. Gives her advice on drawing a dragon, and he says, "You can't try too hard, and you can't not try too hard. You just have to wait, and eventually the dragon will descend." And then the next scene is this incredible sequence of a dragon descending from cloud cover in the middle of the night to reside on the page in their little crappy artist squalor studio. And that's meant to represent Oe just catching it at the right time, getting inspired the right way, and just really knocking it out of the park. But the movie buys into that imaginative quality of being an artist, and what it's like to, if you've ever wondered what it's like to create things wholesale and you don't have that in you, I encourage you to go take an art class, or go pick up a sketchbook and just start sketching randomly. It's much more rewarding than you think, even if you don't know what you're doing. You'll find your way to something. But this film captures that imagination perfectly, but it also captures the downside of that imagination, the other side of the coin, as it were. So I'm going to go on a weird tangent here about Yves Saint Laurent. Yves Saint Laurent is considered by many to be an incredible fashion designer, but he was also considered to be too fragile for the world he was born into. And eventually, I think he took his own life. And you hear creative people and creative thinkers spoken about that way often. Anthony Bourdain is another one that people talk about in that same way. He was there's some imbalance in him that led him to take his own life. And in truth, as a creative person, as somebody who has always had creative jobs, who draws for fun and for therapy, your imagination is a blessing and a curse. Because it lets you imagine the most beautiful things you could ever conceive of, even things that you could never get down on the page. If you're lucky, you get a portion of them down on the page. But also lets you see the most terrifying things that most people would never even conceive of. Lots of people decry me for not being up on the news. And the thing I always think is, I know there's bad things happening. I know that the world is bad. I don't need to know the specifics, because the specifics will live in my head in a way that they probably won't live in yours, because I will see it on the back of my eyelids when I close my eyes. I will remember it. It will live rent-free in a way that is not helpful to anybody's mental state, if you have ever experienced that. And what you see in Hokusai when he goes to finally visit Nanao towards the last third of the movie, is you see now realizing he'd come to visit her. And she's lying down in bed and facing towards the ceiling with a blank stare because she can't see anything. And she reaches up and touches his face. And if you know anything about blind people, for blind people, touching your face is a really big deal. It is really a thing that happens. If you never experienced it, it is totally a thing that happens. But it's considered to be a really intimate, meaningful act for a blind person to be like, I want to know what you look like, come here, and put hand to face. And what should be a touching moment of a parent remembering, they want to remember what I look like, is greeted by Hokusai kind of staring death in the face. And you see what Hokusai You see, so when I talked about Inuo, I talked about the fact that disability reminds people of things that they don't want to be reminded of. Because people with disabilities remind able-bodied people that things can go bad in ways that you could never conceive of. That your body can fail in ways that are terrifying and awful. When people see blind people, they realize, oh, so many people think, oh, what would it be like not to see? They can't conceive of it. And very often, able-bodied people can't contextualize it. They can't contextualize being disabled. But what you see when Hokusai sees his second daughter for the first time after a long while, is you see that he sees what lies ahead for this poor kid. And I've already hinted to it, and so did the movie. And what he's afraid of is not the girl in front of him. It's not her fault. What he's afraid of is the reality that her disability represents, and that is death. And immediately after, he goes into this long diatribe about how death is the thing that he is most afraid of. And he draws and he illustrates this incredible painting of this guardian spirit that he has Oe deliver to her mother, where Onao is staying at that point in the film, because you get the sense that, and by this point, if you haven't picked up on it, you get the sense that the monks that Onao was living with have brought her back home because they wanted her to spend her last moments with her mother at the very least, or her father, or her family at the best. Because it's clear that Onao is not long for the world. And that's kind of the nail in the coffin for Hokusai in that part of the film, in that back third, is that the whole film treats him like, certainly not like an afterthought. He is the legendary artist everyone claims him to be, but he's also a mess. He's just kind of grumpy, unclean, unkempt, lecherous. He lies. There is a tendency in terms of artistry to excuse bad behavior from talented people. And this is true not just in artistry, but in any kind of realm of talent or ability. Case in point, people excuse all kinds of bad behavior, less now than they used to, from artists in music. And very often they'll try to separate the art from the artist. And that gets a little bit more tricky if you're talking about the creator of Rurouni Kenshin and what he did, which I'm not going to get into here. But suffice to say that if you're watching Rurouni Kenshin in this day and age, he's getting part of that money. That's not okay, considering what he's done. And with this, and I keep saying, any good artist biopic tends to do, in my opinion, is lay bare who the person was and not let people off the hook for their sins. So I'm going to end this talking about another movie entirely. And that movie is something that just came out. It's a Michael Jackson movie. I think it's called Michael, literally. And you watch this film, and this film starts with, essentially, by the way, spoiler alert for the Michael Jackson movie, this film starts with Joe Jackson beating the crap out of Michael Jackson with a belt. On screen, they don't cut away. They don't even cut away but let you hear the screams. They show it. And if you don't know anything about this movie, that hits you really hard. Even if you do know something about the movie, that hits you particularly hard because that's not something films do normally. Very often they'll shy away from that stuff because you don't need the spectacle of it. But what that scene helps do is it helps start you on a progression path with Michael as an artist until about the first Michael Jackson record. And then it cuts off alarmingly soon. Because the movie had been doing the things that you do, is that it shows his nose job collapsing. It showed the Pepsi commercial where his hair got caught on fire and he had horrible third-degree burns on his scalp for much of his life after that. It shows all this stuff, and it's doing a fairly decent job of showing Michael Jackson as being like a Michael Jackson biopic. Except there's stuff missing. There's Janet Jackson is nowhere to be found. There's two other siblings aside from Janet Jackson who are also not in the film. And then leave off the entire second half of his career. Because the thing was the movie was made in concert with the Jackson family. Primarily, because the person who plays Michael Jackson is Michael Jackson's nephew, and he does an incredible job but they also needed access to Michael Jackson's music catalog to make the movie. There was just no way around it the way they wanted it to. So what you end with is something less than a biopic, because it's a movie that's deeply entertaining, yes, and the music is excellent, but it's not a full portrayal of who he was. They drop tons of hints to Neverland Ranch. Bubbles the monkey shows up, but it's not a full picture. And I understand why, but now having rewatched Miss Hokusai for like fourth or fifth time, I appreciate the fact that they put so much into making all of the artist characters in this movie pretty real. And not even just all of the artist characters, but all of the characters in general. No one's perfect in this movie. There are people who have great intentions. People aren't inherently evil in this movie ever. But showing Hokusai's incredible, soul-gripping fear of death, and seeing him see that in his daughter, who's blind, is really soul-shaking. And he says a little later on, maybe this is my fault. Maybe I have no one else to blame. Maybe I stole her sight and life. And then the movie ends with Onao passing. And with that weight and grief coming in full for probably Oe's mother, but definitely because Oe, for almost the entire film, is pretty waffles between being disaffected and being annoyed. And you can understand why this is. She's constantly under the thumb of her father regards her as a talented artist, but nowhere near his level, obviously. And she's very aware of, oh, you're not there yet. Until the end of the movie when he says, maybe it's time you did your own work instead of shadowing for me. And I think what he's saying there is he's saying, I think you've lived an amount of life that will make your work meaningful, and you don't need to follow my footsteps anymore. But the most expressive Oe is in the movie is almost towards the very end when Zenjiro returned from wherever Zenjiro was, it doesn't really matter. And a breeze and a massive gust of wind comes through their little artist collective hobble thing and blows papers everywhere. And Oe realizes that there's something wrong because Zenjiro said, I thought there was a little girl following me. And he describes her haircut as being the same as Nanao's. And they have this incredibly long cut of animation of Oe running. And it's the only time you ever see her run in the film. Never runs. She says, I've got to go do something. She always walks. She's never running. And she's running frantically, and by the time she gets to her mother's house, she's out of breath. And it's this incredible, super well-scored, very dramatic scene. And her mother says that Nanao has already passed. And then they cut back to Hokusai, and Hokusai is looking at a small, crumpled camellia blossom on the floor of their hobble. And he goes, you sweet girl, you made it back here. And that's how the movie ends. And it's a struggle to talk about this movie because unless you're talking about the idea of being an artist and the idea of living as an artist, the only real thing to latch onto is the plotline with Nanao. I think that's on purpose because they want to show you the kinds of lives. The movie endeavored to show you the kind of life that an artist lives and the kind of life that a lesser-known artist in the same time period, one of the most famous artists of all time, lived. I know it's really effective at that. It's really easy to make a biopic about someone massively famous. It's much harder to make a biopic about the next level down from them. I think that's what this movie tries to do in its own way. And yes, it's totally, it's a fictionalized account. A lot of Hokusai's life is also slightly fictionalized. No one's quite sure of certain things because he was alive so long ago, and he liked to create myths about himself, apparently, which did not help. So on that note, that's where I'm going to leave it. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.